Hello and welcome to the Athlete Archives. This is the unbelievable story of Ray Caldwell, the man who was struck by lightning while pitching, got up, and finished the game. Unfortunately, this is also the story of a man who could not overcome his addiction to alcohol. Ray Caldwell was said to have as much talent as the great Christy Mathewson and Walter Johnson, but he drank himself into mediocrity. Ray was a pitcher during the dead ball era of baseball. That's a time frame when home runs were very rare and pitchers dominated the game. If you want to hear more about this era, I hope you consider watching my video on Ray Chapman. Chapman was famously killed by a pitch that hit him in the head in 1920. And as it turns out, Ray Caldwell was a teammate of Ray Chapman. And it was the year before Chapman died when Caldwell would have this historic game in 1919. Ray was born April 26, 1888 in Pennsylvania. Ray was raised by his mother and stepfather. His stepfather was a telegrapher, a profession that Ray would also enter into and work for 7 years, even during his playing days. Ray discovered baseball later in life, but immediately showed talent. He signed a semi-pro contract in 1909 at the age of 21 and became a full-on professional the following year in 1910. That year he pitched 6 games for the New York Highlanders. His first full major league season in 1911, Ray became the Highlanders' number 2 starter. He would throw 255 innings that year with a respectable .335 ERA, and he would also hit .272 in 159 plate appearances. Ray, who picked up the nickname Slim because of his 6'2", 190-pound frame, would battle through a shoulder injury for the next 2 seasons before coming back in 1914 with a career-best .194 ERA over 213 innings pitched. By this point, Ray had shown his potential for greatness, but also his tendency towards self-destruction. Multiple times, Ray had disappeared during road trips, only to hook back up with the team days later. He would go on heavy drinking binges and never seemed to really take team rules very seriously. He would be fined many times for violating curfew and for not being at team meetings or sometimes just not even showing up for games. Manager Frank Chance did what he could. He kept fining Ray, and eventually Ray's fines came to $900 one season. Pretty hefty fine. That's about 11% of his annual salary. Ray would end up leaving his team for the Federal League and the Buffalo Bison. He would never play a game for Buffalo. He would return to New York in 1915 after manager Frank Chance had had enough and resigned. New York would hire Wild Bill Donovan, and they would rescind the outstanding fines for Ray and offer him a contract worth $8,000 a year for 3 years, which is about $197,000 today. It was at this time that the Senators offered Walter Johnson as a trade for Caldwell. Washington team president Calvin Griffith offered Walter Johnson to the new owners of the Yankees for Ray Caldwell during this time, as both pitchers were flirting with the Federal League. American League President Ban Johnson advised the New York owners not to accept the deal because Ray was so talented and had so much potential. Ray's 18-9 record, despite missing 2 months of the season, and his .194 ERA compared favorably with Johnson's 28-18 record and .172 ERA. Obviously, we know today Walter Johnson was in the inaugural Hall of Fame class and turned out to be the better pitcher. But in 1915, Ray would couple his success on the mound with a sudden surge in power at the plate. He would hit 4 home runs in 1915, half of his career total. And remember, this is the dead ball era. The team leader for New York that year only had 5, and that was with nearly 4 times as many plate appearances. It seems that for 1915, Ray remained fairly sober, but would fall off the wagon hard in 1916. He would be suspended and fined multiple times in 1916, and at times nobody even knew where he was or what he was doing. The Sporting News reported on September 21 that Ray had been a patient for alcohol treatment in a St. Louis hospital. There was no word that offseason of Ray's whereabouts. Then reports came back to the States that an American pitcher by the name of Collins was pitching for Cologne in Panama. Collins, who reportedly bore a very eerie resemblance to Ray Caldwell, because it was Ray Caldwell. As spring training 1917 approached, the missing Yankee ace got plenty of press, and most of it was negative. From the Washington Post on February 25, 1917, quote, "Caldwell is an example of a great pitcher going to ruin by his failure to take care of himself." Also in the Post that same day, the headline, "Caldwell absent. Yankees erratic hurler fails to start for Dixieland." Also, this quote, "When the New York Yankees vanguard reached Washington last night, Ray Caldwell was not in the party, and neither Captain Houston nor manager Bill Donovan knew aught of his whereabouts. They had an idea that he might be lurking in the Capitol, probably searching for a, quote, leak," which I guess is a euphemism for alcohol. The Sporting News' Joe Vila minced no words, writing about Ray's desertion and dissipation on March 8th. Quote, "This fellow Caldwell is a most peculiar chap. He is sensitive and boyish, although he is 29 years old. He is good-natured, intelligent, and nervy when he faces the opposing batsman, but he lacks self-control when temptation is near at hand, and for that reason he has fallen from grace on several occasions." All that said, when Ray reported to the team in 1917, he looked better than ever. The Yankees decided to give him another chance. He was too good, and he was also in the last year of his contract. And Ray behaved for a few months. And then he pitched both games of a doubleheader in June. A few days later, he was fined and suspended for 10 days for not showing up to the ballpark after a hard night drinking. Ray would repeat the cycle over and over, a great athletic performance followed by heavy drinking or getting into trouble. The day Ray returned from his suspension, July 10, he pitched 9 2/3 innings of shuttle ball, winning a game against Eddie Plank and the St. Louis Browns. That very night, Ray was arrested by St. Louis police and charged with grand larceny, stealing a $150 ring from Mrs. Lucky Dick. A few weeks later, Ray's wife Nellie charged abandonment and sued for support, demanding more than $100 of his monthly salary for herself and her 7-year-old son. A few weeks after that, Ray fell off the wagon again and failed to show up at an exhibition game that he was supposed to pitch for charity. At the end of the 1917 season, the Yankees replaced Wild Bill Donovan as manager with Miller Huggins. Huggins immediately assigned 2 private detectives to follow Ray. They were instructed to keep Ray away from trouble and out of bars. They did not succeed. Ray hurt his knee in spring training of 1918, which impacted his pitching, but his hitting was so good that Miller Huggins kept him in the lineup as an outfielder. In mid-August of 1918, Ray abandoned the Yankees to go work for the, quote, Teachin and Long Dry Dock Company of New Jersey. Shipbuilding and steel industries had baseball teams at the time, and they were considered essential services, vital to the Allied war effort. And during World War I, a number of players would join companies like this to avoid the military draft. Huggins had enough and traded the rights to Caldwell to the Red Sox. Ray would become roommates in early 1919 with another legendary carouser, the great Babe Ruth. The Red Sox had little patience for Ray and ended up releasing him in July. In August, Tris Speaker, the player manager for the Cleveland Indians, signed Ray. And Tris, trying to come up with a way to keep a sober Caldwell on the mound, structured probably the oddest contract in baseball history. The contract stated, quote, "After each game he pitches, Ray Caldwell must get drunk. He is not to report to the clubhouse the next day. The second day, he is to report to Manager Speaker and run around the ballpark as many times as Manager Speaker stipulates. The third day, he is to pitch batting practice, and the fourth day, he is to pitch in a championship game." It actually worked. Credit to Tris Speaker. Ray started 6 games at the end of that season. He won 5 of them with a 171 earned run average. Umpire and columnist Billy Evans wrote in January of 1920, quote, "There is nothing more remarkable in the 1919 campaign than the remarkable Slim Caldwell." So Ray's first start for his new team in Cleveland would be the game that would make history. On August 24, 1919, a Sunday, Ray was on the mound to face the Philadelphia Athletics. A light rain started falling in the 4th inning, and as the afternoon rolled on, dark clouds started crawling in from Lake Erie. The Indians had scored the game's first 2 runs in the bottom of the 4th inning. Ray Chapman and Tris Speaker had both walked. First baseman Joe Harris sacrificed the runners over. Third baseman Larry Gardner grounded out, scoring Chapman for a 1-0 Indians lead. Bill Wamgans, or Wamby, then hit a grounder to short. Dugan fielded and threw off target to first, and the error allowed Speaker to score from third. Indians now up 2-0. The A's cut the Tribes' lead in half in the 5th. George Burns was hit by a pitch and eventually scored a run on a ground ball by Cy Perkins. Heading into the 9th inning, the Indians were up 2-1. Ray was due to face the meat of the Athletics lineup, the 3-4-5 hitters. Left fielder Tilly Walker, right fielder George Burns, and shortstop Joe Dugan. Ray worked to get Walker and Burns out, leaving only Dugan standing in the way of a win. As Ray was about to deliver a pitch, a huge lightning bolt ripped from the clouds. Frightened spectators ran for cover. Harry P. Edwards from the Sporting News wrote, quote, "There was a blinding flash that seemed to set the diamond on fire, and Caldwell was knocked flat from the shock of it. Caldwell lay stretched out in the pitcher's box. His teammates feared he may have been killed." Indians catcher Steve O'Neill had his catcher's mask and his hat blown off. Harry Davis, coaching third base for the A's, had his hat blown off. First base umpire Billy Evans said, quote, "We could all feel the tingle of the electric shock running through our systems, particularly in our legs." Davis, the press reported, got a second shock, for Cy Perkins came up to feel Harry's head to see if he was hurt. The lightning had charged Davis's hair with electricity, and his whole frame tingled when Cy touched him. Teammates also claimed to have felt an electrical current from lightning hitting the metal spikes on their shoes. Still alive and recovering from the jolt, Caldwell picked himself up from the dirt. He did a quick inventory of his arms and legs, and what a relief everything was still attached. One of his teammates touched him on the head and leaped into the air. He said the pitcher seemed to be crackling with electricity. One Cleveland player who complained of numbness was Ray Chapman, who, as I said, nearly a year later, was killed by a pitch thrown by the Yankees' Carl Mays. Running to Caldwell from his shortstop position, Chapman nearly fell over from the numb feeling in his legs. Newspaper reports say lightning danced along the ballpark rails near where some fans were sitting and jumped toward the pitcher's mound. Once the dust settled, Caldwell pitched to Dugan and forced him to hit a ground ball to Gardner as the clouds broke and the rain came down heavily. Game over. Indians 2, Athletics 1. Caldwell pitched maybe the most unique, complete game, allowing Philadelphia only 1 run and 4 hits. He struck out 3 and walked 2. After the game, Caldwell told the Cleveland Press that the lightning strike, quote, felt just like somebody came up with a board and hit me on the top of the head and knocked me down. He assessed the damage and found that he had slight burns on his chest. Speculation was that lightning had hit the metal button on his cap, surged through his body, and exited through his metal spikes. Ray would go on to pitch again 5 days later, and in 1920, the year that Chapman died, Ray would win 20 games and help the Indians win the pennant and eventually the World Series. Ray would go on to pitch again for Cleveland in 21, and then spent another 12 years pitching professionally in the minor leagues. He would retire after 1933 with 293 career wins, 134 of those at the major league level. At that point, Ray was a 43-year-old grandpa on his 4th marriage. When he retired for good in 1933, he had earned $49,400 from baseball. He spent his later years running a farm, working as a telegrapher, teaching baseball clinics for kids, and working as a greeter at a casino. During Ray's 12-year minor league career, he was never offered a major league contract. His reputation for drinking and partying kept the scouts away. Caldwell died in 1967. There's a plaque in Ray's honor at Cleveland's Progressive Field. It reads, quote, Caldwell had perhaps the most electric debut in Cleveland Indians history. That's the story of Ray Caldwell. I hope you enjoyed his story. Quite a unique one. Thank you and take care.